Hello, amazing listeners. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about the complexities of adulthood, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. I am your host, Bukola. You just stumbled on the right podcast. If you're tired of figuring out this adulthood phase all alone, now let's do it together. Hi. So this is a very special episode because we're celebrating a milestone on today's episode. And I'll be spilling the tea on what we're celebrating in a bit. But right before that, a friend messaged me last week and she asked me a very simple question. She said, what makes your podcast different from other podcasts? And I felt like I needed to realize it on today's episode. And that is, becoming you is actually a journey of self-discovery, a journey that never really ends. And so like the name of the podcast implies here, the podcast is just a podcast that is really concerned about collective growth, about self-discovery. It's just a podcast that wants to help adults realize the need to embrace the beauty in the imperfections of this adulthood phase. I know we all had our expectations. I looked forward to being an adult because I felt like I was going to enjoy my autonomy. I was going to have my own space, make my own decisions. Becoming an adult is like opening a box of surprises. You never really know what you might find in it. This moment, you're planning for something. You're happy and you're excited about a certain thing, a certain decision, a certain achievement you have. The next moment, life throws something else at you and you just have to face it. The funny thing is, the entire idea of this podcast came as a response to the trauma of what I found in the surprise box of my adulting phase. I happened to be the first child of my parents, so I really did not have like any sibling I was trying to copy. Having to just figure everything out all alone was really overwhelming for me, and the idea of the podcast just came from that experience. I just felt like, why do we have to do it alone when we can do it as a collective? Adulting goes beyond taking charge of one's life. It goes beyond living life and making your decisions and doing what you want, when you want, how you want. It goes beyond all of that. Adulting is about facing the consequences of your decisions, not being afraid to hold yourself accountable. You have to be accountable to yourself first and to like the people you care about and people you love. And also you have to shoulder responsibilities. Anyways, I'm taking us back to the roots of the podcast because, drum roll please, because this is our 30th episode. Like, I was really surprised to discover that I've actually been doing this for 30 weeks straight up. It has been 30 weeks of steady, uninterrupted podcast supply. I am actually so excited, and it means a lot to me because one of the greatest fear I had when I was starting this podcast was the fear of consistency, and now look at how far we've come. I was just so scared that I would not be able to stay consistent. So thank you so much for always tuning in. I do not take your support for granted. I love every one of you listening to this podcast. It's really so nice doing this with you and doing this with your support. If you were not tuning in, I would have stopped recording a long time ago. So in today's episode, we'll be going up close and personal on the journey so far. You're looking forward to starting something new in your life and you're just so scared about it. You don't know how you go about it. You're scared of the outcome. You don't know what you might find. Then this episode dedicated to you. It has not been a smooth journey, and at the same time it hasn't been unbearable. So before we move on, as usual, how are you doing? How is everything? Hope you're having a fantastic weekend and hope your week has been good so far. My week has been fine. Nothing extraordinary. So my week has been basically just there. Let me know how yours has been. That being said, now let's dive into the conversation of the day. Right before we dive in, let's hear what these amazing people think of the adulthood phase.
Adulthood is responsibility.
Adulthood is complicated.
Adulthood is growth.
Adulthood is maturity.
Adulthood is being independent.
Adulthood is stressful.
Adulthood has been confronting.
Adulthood is draining.
Adulthood is decision making.
Adulthood is resilient.
Adulthood is overwhelming.
Adulthood is fun and adventurous.
Remember, I'm not here to demonize this phase, but to say it as it is. So I'm going to start the review of our journey so far, the journey of the podcast so far, with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that says, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving. I find this quote very interesting and very inspiring. The first time I heard it, it's connected with me. I live by very few quotes, and this is one of them. Life gets tough and you just have to keep going. No matter how slow you think you're moving, you just have to keep moving. And this quote perfectly summarizes the journey of the podcast so far. It has been a journey. There have been great days, there have been bad days. I've enjoyed some really satisfying moments and faced some rather frustrating moments. But overall, the podcast is growing, the podcast is moving. After uploading last week's episode, I got a subscriber on YouTube and I was excited about it. Just one subscriber, yeah, but like we've been really moving at a slow pace, but it's been steady. And whenever I feel down, I just remember it has actually been a journey. And the fact that I'm not really considering giving up as an option is a win for me. I enjoy doing it. Like I really do enjoy talking. It gives me the sense of fulfillment. We'll be sharing some of the things I've enjoyed so far and some of the things that have really frustrated me. Firstly, let's go to the genesis of the situation. Throwing it back to November, a month before I decided to launch the podcast. I launched the podcast in December, yeah. I had a conversation with a friend and I remember telling her that I didn't feel like I was ready for the podcast because I felt really unprepared mentally. I felt unprepared emotionally. I knew like I was going into my second year for my master's and I would need more time to write, to research and all of that. And I wanted to just postpone the whole thing and leave the launch of the podcast till after my master's. She said something. She said, you don't need to be ready. She understood that I was scared and she just encouraged me to do it afraid, and I did it and I'm still doing it. If I had started the podcast then in December, I don't think I even see myself as ready now to start the podcast. I still feel unprepared. I still feel like there's still a lot of work to be done. I still feel like I still need to grow and I still need to give myself time to develop and to get more matured to like handle the podcast and the pressure that comes with dropping episodes weekly. That being said, I just feel there is never a perfect time to do something. I had so many fears then and my fears were actually valid. So I just had this great feel of like, who is going to listen to this podcast? And look at me now. I actually have people listening to me weekly and it's been nice. I know I'm not where I aim to be, but it's so nice that I'm moving forward. I'm glad I started when I did because so far I've seen myself grow over the month. Then as we established, I think there was one episode of the podcast where we spoke about how the idea of a perfect life is an illusion, and I just want to re-emphasize that in today's episode. Not only is the idea of a perfect life an illusion, the idea of perfection itself is actually an illusion. There is nothing like a perfect life or a perfect time to start something or a perfect moment to do something. We only have the right time, and the right time is when we choose it to be. So if you have something you've been wanting to start, you have something you've been trying to do and you're waiting for perfect time, sorry to break it to you, there's no perfect time. Choose to make it right by just starting it. Start now. Do it anyway, do it afraid, do it crying, but just make sure you do it. I said it on last week's episode that I've made friends with like older people, and one thing I've learned from having older friends is the deepest regrets we can have in our old age is not doing something we wanted to do or not doing something we want to do because we're afraid that we will be judged or will not do well at it. Because when we don't get to try it out, we will never know if we would have done well at it. So the best thing is, don't wait to live with the regrets of not doing that thing you feel would make you happy, because we should do it anyway, but it is always advisable for us not to do it anyhow. Starting the podcast, I didn't have all the resources I needed, and I still do not have everything I need. You will get better, but when you're starting something out, you don't have to wait to have the perfect resources, but always just try to give it your best at every given time. You want to look back and be glad you did it and you put your all into it. It's really been an interesting journey because this podcast has given me sweet moments. It has helped me through difficult times. While editing my podcast, I tend to listen to it multiple times because I'm going back and forth and I'm trying to listen to something over and over again to pick out just to pick out things that are not supposed to be in the podcast. After editing and uploading, I always find it so tiring to listen to the uploaded version of my podcast. But because I follow the channel on Spotify now, I could be listening to other podcasts and my podcast will just play afterward. And at first it's always like, no, I don't want to hear my voice. But later I started settling into it, like, oh, it's cute, listen to your voice. So I think some of those sweet moments my podcast has given me has been, just listening to my podcast and I said that. Funny thing is, the podcast has actually helped me through difficult situations. So really, I've seen myself grow too, because I get to talk about topics I'm still struggling with. One of the satisfactions I derive from this podcast comes from listening to it. And another is actually getting feedbacks from people. A family friend messaged me the other day and he said his mom is such a big fan of me and of the podcast. I was so shocked. The funny thing is that she was even confronting him and was asking him why he hasn't been listening to the podcast. So mommy, thank you so much. It has really been good getting all the support from everybody. It's really nice to see the support that I've been getting from home. My younger sister too, I was having a conversation with her and I was telling her how I was sad and I felt like I was going to stop podcasting, and she goes, don't stop podcasting. No, I really love your podcast. I listen to it on repeat. I just told her that she's obsessed with me. That's it. Talking about getting support from friends and from family, I think we have to understand too that we might not always get support from everyone in our lives when we embark on a new journey. I know you might be thinking of starting something new, then you count the people, everybody you have in your life, like, oh, okay, I have like 50 something people on my contact list or 100 and something people on my contact list. I want you to know right now that those 100 and something people would not be supporting you back to back. The people that will support you will support you. And the realization of this was actually a bit disheartening for me, because at first when I didn't get support from certain people, I was hurt. But later I came to terms with it, like not everybody will support you or support me, and that's fine. You know, you have to just be your biggest fan. You don't need everybody to support you. You don't need everybody to always give you words of affirmation, and that's why you really need to love what you do, because you have to be your biggest fan. You have to believe in what you do. I enjoy talking, and I think that's one thing that has really kept me going, because apart from the good reviews I've received from like constructive criticism, which is not a bad thing. Constructive criticism help us grow. I really appreciate them, and it's really nice because I know the areas I need to work on and things I need to do. And I've gotten some funny reviews too. There was one my dad gave me and it was like, this generation, people are not really concerned with listening to stuff. Everybody just wants to watch things that will make them laugh. And it was telling me how I could use memes in the videos and how I could add like funny sounds to the audio and all. And I was like, it's a podcast. There's been that, so I've had to constantly remind people that it's a podcast. On the bright side, I'm not doing video for a while. Help people remember that this is actually supposed to be listened to. This is actually a podcast and not a vlog. This is actually a podcast and not a skit, and it's actually just a talk show. Getting advices from people in life, whenever we are embarking on a particular journey, a journey where we just have to like do something we've been wanting to do, or where we're just going out of our way to find ourselves, we might be confused about what we're doing, but we should never be confused about where we are headed. People will give you advice, but you just have to remember that you don't have to take all the advice you get, because some of them might be a distraction and some of them might just help you lose focus. So you just have to like know what to take and what not to take. Talking about listeners and all, now to the not so good parts of podcasting of the last 6 months. Saturdays have become like depressing days for me because I upload new episodes every Saturday. At first I used to tell myself figures do not matter, I don't care about the numbers, I'm doing something I love doing, doesn't matter if nobody listens. If nobody was listening, I think I would have stopped podcasting. But I tell myself those things because I need to encourage myself. But Saturdays have not been the same because I do care about the numbers, and most times I'm going to check YouTube, I'm checking Spotify, I'm like, nobody's listening to me. Fine, it gets to me, but at the same time I always try to scold myself and remind myself that it's not all about the numbers. I have people that listen to the podcast because they want to listen to it. I've had my friends say, oh, we're not listening to this podcast because you are the one, we're listening to it because we actually like the content of the podcast. And I think that's really satisfying for me. I have some of them that listen because it's their friend. Most people don't have the habit of listening to podcasts, but it's always really satisfying when I see people that listen because they genuinely want to listen. Speaking about the numbers, is actually hard to be consistent when you're not getting your desired results from something. Because sometimes I'm trying to record and I remember the numbers I get. I'm like, even if it's just one person listening to the podcast, it's worth it. I just really remind myself that it's important for me to keep moving and it's very important for me to keep talking. So I continue, and whenever I feel like really down, I talk to people. I find talking to people to be very therapeutic if I just open up and talk to someone that understands what I'm going through. Moving forward, I really hope I can maintain this streak of consistency. Easy, like it's not easy at all. I really hope to maintain it, and I hope the podcast continues to grow. Another thing I've had to deal with since I started the podcast is imposter syndrome. It has had me on chokehold since I started this podcast in December. So many times I felt like giving up because sometimes I just feel like I'm not good enough and I still need to work on myself. And yeah, I'm actually admitting that I still need to work on myself, but that is what the podcast is about after all. It's about progressive growth. Yeah, it's about working on oneself and discovering oneself. So it's just the journey, and it's really nice for me to be documenting this journey of self-discovery via this podcast. So yes, there'll be self-doubt. Yes, there'll be these things. There'll be imposter syndrome. But I am constantly reminded by the people that drop their feedback, by everyone that's listening to this podcast, that I am capable. Actually, my belief in myself has increased significantly. And I also strongly believe in the podcast. I know that this podcast is going to grow beyond my expectation. And I hope to develop a community of like-minded individuals who are willing to learn, grow, and have fun along the way. So this is more like, I don't even know if it's a ranting episode. I don't know what it is, but this has been my journey so far, podcasting. It's been a roller coaster of emotions. It's just a lot of things going through my head, so many opinions, so many feedbacks, so many comments. Thank you all for everything. Thank you for sticking with the podcast, and cheers to many more episodes, and cheers to a journey of continuous self-discovery. Thanks for listening. Catch you on the next episode. Do not forget to live every moment and leave no room for regret. Remember to follow this channel so you get notification whenever I drop a new episode. Thank you. Bye.